Welcome back. So we are now going to turn our attention to walking through the steps of the HIA process. And the purpose of this third module is to talk about screening, which essentially asks, do we need to conduct an HIA? So I'd like to just tell you what screening is, and then we'll talk through how we get there. HIA screening essentially involves the HIA team and stakeholders determining whether an HIA is needed, can be accomplished in a timely manner, and would add value to the decision-making process. Screening is one of the most important steps of the HIA process because it's critical to know that HIA is not the best tool for every single decision. We know that HIAs add the most value when health is not already part of the discussion. HIAs ideally should be done if it's likely to add information that will lead to a better decision. And that's why the screening step is so important. I want to just hit on this first point of the slide for a moment, where we strive to do HIAs when health is not already part of the discussion. There are certainly opportunities when health is part of the discussion, but not in a real prominent way, and we think there's room to increase or to elevate the role of health in a decision. And that, to me, is still a time where an HIA is valuable. And we'll see an example of that in a moment. There are a number of screening questions that are essentially would yield a yes or no answer that would help you decide whether or not you should do an HIA. So one of these questions is, is there a decision regarding a policy, plan, or project that's currently under decision that is likely to impact health? So the first thing about this, if we sort of dissect the sentence, is there a decision? Is there a proposal that's being considered? The second part is it currently under consideration? And again, since HIAs are not about this academic exercise, we want them to inform decision-making. We want a decision that's actively being considered. Ultimately, though, we'll see a few times, and as somebody who does policy, there might be a proposal that was considered last year that we look at for an HIA. And I support that being a valid, potentially valid decision or to apply an HIA to, because we think that that proposal might come back up again during a future legislative session. But for the most part, we're talking about decisions currently under consideration. And why that matters also is that we want to think about stakeholder engagement. And if we have this hypothetical decision we're thinking about, it's going to be hard to really get to those stakeholders and to identify them. A second question we're asking is, will some populations face greater harms or benefit more than others? So this gets back to thinking about, are there groups that are disproportionately going to be affected by that decision? Another question is health broadly defined already a focus? Would the HIA bring new information to the decision-making process? We also want to know, is there an opportunity to inform the decision-making process? Or are the stakeholders so against what we're doing that once we produce the HIA, they're not even going to pay attention to it? We also want to ask, who will the HIA inform? Who are those key decision makers and stakeholders? Can we access them? Can we engage them in the process? Are there resources available? Do we have enough time? Do we have enough money? Do we have to pay to access data? When will the decision be made? This is critical. Because if the decision is going to be made in 2 weeks from now and we cannot do a rapid HIA in that time that would produce valid predictions or estimates, then we might decide that now is not the best time to do an HIA. So let's walk through a couple of examples. So here's example number one. So here's a scenario where we have a school district that wants to better understand the health impacts of a recent reciting of its elementary school. So do we do an HIA or not? The answer is that we would not do an HIA. Well, why not? Because this HIA would not inform a proposed decision, right? So I said in the scenario, it was a recent reciting. So the school has already been recited and there's no decision to make here. This would be an example where you might want to conduct an evaluation, right? To sort of see what happens once that school is recited and to see what happens for health. But if the decision was that they hadn't decided where the reciting was going to occur, then perhaps an HIA would have been useful. Okay, I hope that's clear. So here's a second example. We're trying to figure out, is health already at the table? So this scenario is a hospital is considering a new policy to serve healthier foods. So do you think we should do an HIA or not? So my answer is that we probably would not do an HIA. Well, why not? Well, we first of all think about a hospital, right? And so it's a hospital, and we're also thinking about healthier foods. And so these individuals are probably already thinking about how this new policy is going to impact health. So it's possible or less likely that this HIA is going to provide new or important information on previously unrecognized health issues. That being said, it could certainly be the situation where the hospital is considering a new policy to serve healthier foods, and the health outcomes or the impacts on health really have not been part of the conversation. And if that's the case, then it might be that an HIA would still be useful, but probably not in this scenario. And here's our third example. And this is getting at the question around HIA being feasible in terms of timing and resources. So there's a local health advocacy organization, and they want to conduct an HIA on next month's decision to locate a proposed Walmart distribution center in their county. Over the past 2 years, this decision has been debated. They've not had any luck getting decision makers to pay attention to concerns about health impacts. So would you do an HIA or not here? So I would argue we would not do an HIA, but this is one where I'd also say it depends. But let me tell you first why I think an HIA might not be the best tool. And that really comes down to timing, right? So the decision is going to be made next month. And if we think about that, the question is, do we have enough resources, enough time to actually do the HIA? The other part I want to highlight is that we've learned that over the last 2 years, decision makers have not even cared about health. So it could be that they're not open to considering the HIA findings and recommendations so late in the process. I did say it depends though, because I think that this scenario could present an opportunity. Maybe there's some new health information that can be shared. Maybe there are some new stakeholders to engage. So if there are enough resources and the time to get a robust analysis completed, then perhaps an HIA could be done. But under the way that this scenario is written, I'd probably say no. So these examples I borrowed from the Human Impact Partners HIA organization out in Oakland, and these are examples I include in HIA trainings. They've included in HIA training. So I hope that they've helped you to think through some of these screening questions. Let me end this module by showing you a screening worksheet. I know it looks really small, but this is in the resource list that you have, so I just wanted to put it up on the screen, where it helps you think through all of the different aspects that should be considered in screening. So this first cell asks questions about project and timing. There are questions about health impacts, about the potential impacts, the stakeholders, etc. So there are a number of tools out there. This is a great one that I like to use, where it helps me think through all of the different questions to help decide should an HIA be conducted or not. So that concludes a brief overview of that first step to the HIA process called screening. Again, one of the most important steps, and we will shortly turn to the next step in the HIA process, which is scoping.